Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Bean Studios in Northfield, Vermont. I am live here for a second episode of Creemee Cast. Not exactly unexpected episode, but a little unexpected, but surely enough, here we are. So thank you very much for tuning in, everybody, and thank you so much, Steve Barry, for joining me here today on Creemee Cast. Steve is an independent candidate for United States Senate, and he is running against Gerald Malloy, Bernie Sanders, and I believe there's maybe another name or two there, or is it just the three of you guys?
I haven't been paying attention too much.
Well,
It's very difficult running a campaign, you have to just focus in on the specifics.
I kind of do know what you mean. So tell me a little bit about yourself, Steve. What made you want to jump into this race?
Well, before that, can I just tell you, this is the first time in Northfield.
Really?
Yeah, I've passed it so many times, but my father went to school here.
Okay.
He went to Norwich University just before he entered the military in the Army Air Corps, and he fought in 2 wars. And it's because of his experience being in Vermont, here at Norwich, but also down at Camp Sangamon in Pittsford, Vermont, that he got attracted to this area. And when he had a war experience where he was shot down, his plane, and he decided that he was going to go into the ministry. And so we'd never own our own home. So when his dad died in Switzerland, he inherited a little bit of money, enough to buy some acreage up in Eden, Vermont. And that was 5 years ago. I was 5 years old at the time. So I was introduced to Vermont by my father, who was a war veteran, who had a war experience. After 2 wars, he was called up to Korea, and then he decided, we will never have our home because we'll live in a parsonage, and I want to have a place for our family to come. So it became our family homestead since 1956, the first year that I came up here.
Wow.
So I have lived here full time sometimes, but I've gone around the world, not around the whole world, but partially. And Vermont has always been home. So I'm like a homing pigeon. Whenever I've been someplace else, I always had to come back to Vermont, because Vermont really has always been the one stable place that we had, the one place that really meant something to us, where we had our most wonderful memories as family, here in the mountains of Vermont. And so that's the reason why I'm here. I love Vermont. I love town meeting. That's really important to me.
Yeah.
I love the fact that we have an opportunity to express ourselves, and that in town meeting you hear all sorts of voices, and you do it one-on-one, and that really has a huge impact on me. I grew up as a PK, that's a preacher's kid, in a congregational church, and we have a lot of them in the state of Vermont. And that also informed me about democracy, because this form of government we have comes out of the meeting house. It comes out of the congregational churches.
Yes.
And so that's how I learned about democracy, because we did it in church, and nobody, not even the minister, had but one voice and one vote. And everybody was able to exercise that. And so that has become really extremely important for me over the years, and it's the messiest thing. Right now, what we're hearing is Hillary Clinton, John Kerry, there's a host of others, Bill Gates, of course, who said that, we really don't need to follow the First Amendment because it's too messy. The New York Times, the New York Review.
That's what they're saying.
Yeah, they're saying because we don't want to have malinformation. We want to be able to eliminate the voices, basically, that we disagree with. And that's just so anti-American, particularly anti-New England and anti-Vermont.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely, yeah.
So I grew up in a milieu where I understand, and I've done this for years because I've been a pastor for many years now. I understand how messy it is, but everybody has a chance. Everybody's important. Everyone has a voice. And our little meeting houses all over the state are closing. So what I've been trying to do, and what I've done, is keep some of them open. I've been teaching classes for people who want to become ministers, and they have graduated, 11 of them. We've kept open 8 churches in our area because of those classes.
Wow.
These are bivocational people. These are people that have a job like you have a job, but they also have a calling. And part of that calling is to make sure that community stays alive, that the meeting house is retooled for the 21st century, that we actually have a place where we could meet, where somebody can come in the dead of winter to a warm place, have a bowl of soup and some fresh bread and some sociability, and they don't have to pay their big bills for their home to keep it open. So I'm really focused in on what it means to be part of a community. And a lot of these communities in Vermont are poorer communities. I started out as a pastor in Eden and North Hyde Park, so I understand rural poverty. Later on, when I went to the big city, I got involved with inner city poverty. Poverty is poverty, and it's ugly any way you want to look at it. When people can't afford to buy food or medicine or fuel, it's just ugly. And so part of my job has been, and this is why I run for office, not because I'm really interested in being a legislator, so much as I want to make sure that the voices of people who are out there are heard, and that the people are taken seriously, and that they are cared for. And this is also the burden of responsibility largely has fallen on the middle class to make sure that they pay the bills for the people who can't afford to pay the bills, and that's not fair either. So I'm really in here because I'm interested in making sure that there are voices that will never have a chance to sit in a studio like this, never have a chance to have a one-on-one with a person like you, and say, I'm going to do the best I can to represent you, and I'm going to do the best I can to make sure that you have a voice, and that's why I'm running.
Okay. Well, that's honestly some, when you talk about the community meeting place, I think that's one of my, it's such a, I was just thinking back to so many different experiences, things that I've done. Like I'm down in Boston, you go down to, the downtown meeting house. It's like formerly the Congregational Church. Congregational Church.
Yes.
Okay. And that's where they would, make a lot of decisions. Like you say, the town meeting. And Vermont does have this deeply rooted tradition in that. And I think that you're right. In this state, it does seem like that's starting to fade away more and more and more. Not just even with even groups like that, but within the churches, but like, the Elks Club, the groups like the Rotary, just some of these different organizations that would do fundraisers, for example, for the same types of community engagement, community involvement. And it seems like now they're trying to put those types of those types of problems on the backs of the governments to solve those issues. That's from my perspective, right?
No.
We used to have these different ways of solving those issues. But no, I think that's great. So
voluntary organizations is what you're talking about.
Yes.
And the church was one of them.
And still is.
Of course. And the other ones also were glue that helped to bring the community together. So whether it's the Elks or the VFW or the Eagles,
Legion,
and I'm an Eagle, and so it goes on and on. But we had a big change take place in the late 80s and the early 90s. There was a book written on it. It's called Bowling Alone, and this really did a deep dive on the problem of voluntary organizations collapsing, and how the individualism was taking over, and that the communitarian aspect of our society was being put further and further on the back burner. And when you're not having opportunities for community, what happens is you lose the face-to-face contact. You can't hear your neighbor because you don't know who your neighbor is. You don't have the cohesiveness that you would otherwise have. So that's need, and we all need that. That's what COVID took us away from, and to think that the churches were closed down during COVID, it's incredible. That's also one of the constitutional things that we need to uphold, the opportunity to assemble. That's one of our rights. It's not a privilege.
No.
When Kamala Harris says it's a privilege to be able to speak, no, you can have your voice, and it is a right. That's what we have. We cannot be censored by people who think that they have the only voice that should be heard, and that's a big issue for me right now. I am really concerned that we are losing our sense of community on one level, but also our sense of having the opportunity to share together on a way that's meaningful, that digs down into how to solve problems, because you can only do that when you're civically minded. And civics has to do with bringing people together to talk and then to find ways to actually solve problems and to be better in terms of the relationship within community.
No, I think everything that you're talking about is the more I think about it, it's what's been lost in this country. The community aspect and the voluntary aspect of it, right? It's become so individualized in so many different ways. It's selfish. It's selfishness ultimately. Consumerist society too, as it's gone on for probably, I don't know, since the 70s, late 70s, and it's just become more and more that way. And I think we were talking a little bit about this before, but I think probably the root cause of that is the media, and that's, I mean, from my opinion. But maybe you guys could talk a little bit about that too. I mean, I know Jamie, you were talking about that with me too. And by the way, we do have Jamie Gage here with us, who is what's your position
I'm Steve's friend and a campaign assistant, and I am encouraged by a lot of the things that he is strong enough to go out and say, which are truth. He's kind of it's been used before, but he's a truth teller at the Liars Convention, and that's a phrase, and not afraid to tell the truth, and all these things that we're talking about, the possible loss of freedom of speech is germane to his campaign, and I see it going away, and I see a lot of people rationalizing its loss, and they're good people, really well-intentioned people who want the best for society, greatest good for the greatest number, an ethical argument. But if we lose freedom of speech, that's a real bad thing in my view as well.
No, I think, and to go back kind of to what we'd been talking about a little bit before, it's just like it's become so one-tracked, right? For so, maybe two-tracked, right? It's become so divided in so many different ways in this country, and I guess for the last, I don't know, 6 years, I've been really paying attention to it and understanding it. But you guys have been watching this go for the last 20 or 30, and so you served in the legislature here in Vermont as a Democrat. How recently was that?
Oh, that was back in 2014 to 2016. Now, let me give you a little story about that.
Sure.
I had no idea about running for office. So this is a tale that hopefully people out there who are your listening audience will resonate with. I received a telephone call on a cold winter night in February from somebody in New Jersey. His last name was Green, Taylor Green, I think. And he began talking to me, and I didn't understand what he was saying. He's a young guy. He's 18 years old or something, but he's making a call for the Young Turks. Have you ever heard of the Young Turks? Okay. And I finally said, "Oh, are you talking about Citizens United?" because he didn't come out right out and say Citizens United. And you know what Citizens United is? It's a law that was made by the Supreme Court that allowed corporations to have the same voice as citizens.
Yeah.
So have the same power as citizens, but it's a way in which corporations then were able to filter huge amounts of dark money into politics. So
Okay.
corporations actually owned politicians because of this.
Okay.
So he called me. It's a blank call. Later on I asked the question, how come I was called? Was because you always vote. And they were looking at rolls of people who always showed up to vote.
Sure.
So anyway, he said, will you help me? And I said, okay, what do you want me to do? He said, would you speak to your legislators? I said, yes, I will. So the next day I got on the phone and I called legislators and I met with legislators. And I sat down with them and I said, do you agree with Citizens United? And they looked at me and do you understand what this means? And they said, are you going to support Citizens United? And they said, no. Then I said, then you have to bring it on the floor.
Sure.
So I said this to Senator Dick Sears, and also Senator Ginny Lyons heard about this. And then I had a conference call because of a big sleet storm. I couldn't get up from Manchester to Montpelier for this. But from having zero people involved with Citizens United in the legislature, both in the General Assembly, so both houses. By the beginning of May, it was known throughout the entire state house, and they took a vote to make Vermont the first state to call for reversing of Citizens United, to take dark money out of politics. So that was the impetus of why I ran for office. The person who had been in the legislature was retiring, and I was approached
Sure.
and asked if I would run for office, and I said I would, and I did. And that's how I got into office, because one voice does make a difference. One person can make a difference. All of the people that are in your listening audience and in your viewing audience can make a difference. I'm just a little guy. I'm a country preacher. But I made a difference because I had my voice and I was able to be heard. And they can too. And that's what the beauty of where we are until they close us down so we can't have free speech. And if that happens, believe me, and the media is trying real hard, and you know from Project Censor,
Oh, yes. Yeah.
that's what's happening. And I have all of those books going back decades. And I've read through them. I know the guy who put that program together in California. We've spoken on the phone years ago. And I have to tell you that we're in the place where we're going to lose our free speech unless we strengthen our local town meetings, unless we have a referendum, which I'm calling for, to have town meeting day actually be a state holiday, to have a ballot in which Vermonters can choose where a portion of their percentage of their taxes actually go to. Wouldn't that be nice if you could choose where a portion of the taxes that you pay to the state of Vermont could go to one of the projects that you feel is most important, like the media, or Jay Craven just gave a motion picture. We made a motion picture. It's going around the state. Jay Craven is a really great artist, a great director, and he's not getting any support from the state of Vermont. Well, if you have a percentage of your tax money go to something like in the arts, then that's a game changer. And everybody feels like they have more of a chance to have their voices heard. These are some of the things that I'm interested in. So, you're absolutely in the right position to help people realize their importance in an ongoing basis in their towns. They have to show up and stop not being part of the discussion in their towns, because you'll lose your democracy. You're not going to have it. You will not be able to have a democracy. We will not be able to speak like this in the future. And believe me, this is not something that's craziness on my part talking about this. This was predicted by Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the great philosopher, author, who lived in Vermont. He did a warning to the West in 1975, and he said, this is what's going to happen to you if you do not pay attention and stand up and be strong with your voices on the local level. Now, you may want to have this thing, and maybe your next door neighbor wants to have this thing. It's in that local area that you have that discussion so that you can come to a decision and not have the decision come from top down.
Sure.
And that's the problem with the legislature. And that's the reason why I stopped being a Democrat, or a Republican for that matter, because the lane is too small. I'm not going to stay in my lane. So you, as the chairman of my committee in the legislature, says stay in your lane. Don't go listen to RFK Jr. because he's an anti-vaxxer. I didn't even know what an anti-vaxxer was. He said, don't go hear him because he's an anti-vaxxer. Well, I know him as an environmentalist, and he's the smartest guy that I know out there, and I'm going to go listen to him. Oh, but he's not. He's a Democrat. I know people in his family. So please, don't try to censor me. And I didn't use that word, of course. That wasn't the operative word at that time. But basically, I can say that now. Don't censor me. I'm going to go listen to who I want to listen to. And I did. So, so I found that the lane for me, the Democratic lane, was too small. Although they think that they're very wide and very liberal, it's getting narrower and narrower because they don't want to hear dissenting voices. I would say that probably the same thing is accurate with the Republicans. But I'm an independent, and that means that I have an opportunity to read everything that Anthony Fauci said about how efficacious his vaccines were, and everything with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said with the real Anthony Fauci, which said it's all a bunch of baloney. I can make the decision after I do my homework,
Sure.
And I don't need you as a person above me to tell me what I need to think.
No, and that is very much what the Democratic Party has become here in Vermont and beyond. Did you guys? I think I asked you this before. You listened to Jay Hooper's interview? Did you, by any chance, with the one?
I only, thanks to Jamie, I saw a portion of it, and I was very impressed with Jay. And as a matter of fact, I went to Thunder Road.
Yeah.
The other day, and I was going to fling the
cow chip.
Yeah, I didn't get I was coming from church,
Sure.
So I had a 2.5 hour drive, and I just missed getting in. But I stood there, and who was I with? But Don Hooper. Don Hooper was standing right next to me, so we talked about things other than cow chips.
Sure.
And one of them was his son, who was flinging cow chips.
Oh yeah.
But I said he was very courageous in saying what he said, because in fact,
I know he was. People are giving us crap for interviewing him. I say, guys, listen to what he said. I'm sorry to interrupt. It's just incredible.
No. See, this is what I'm talking about. You need to have voices. You need to have other voices, and you have to be able to change your mind. Let me give you an example. I was listening to some people because I didn't know, I was learning as much as I could in the State House, and we were being asked to look at the Clean Air, or the Clean Heat Act, Clean Heat Standard, yeah. And this is back in 2015, 2016.
Sure.
So I voted for doing that, and I was brought up short. And I ran for re-election again, and I lost. And in reflecting upon it, I said, hey, you know what? Good. I lost because I wasn't paying attention. I wasn't listening to everybody. I was listening more to the people in Montpelier than I was to the people that were not some of the people that I know, but some other the people that I didn't know as well, and I needed to listen to them. And I've been doing that ever since. So that was a wake-up call for me. And that's the reason why I decided, in large part, to depart the Democratic Party, because I felt that they were pushing something that really needed to have more thought put into it. For example, why not make sure that you have done your due diligence in making sure that all of the people who need to have their homes and businesses weatherized are weatherized? Why don't you do that? That's been on the docket for over a decade, maybe 2 decades. You're going to weatherize every home. That's the best way to cut down on your heating costs and eliminating carbon issues. It's just the smartest way to do it. But we can't do that. We have to go off and do some other stuff. And so I got the wheels turning and said, gee, go back to winterizing your homes. Do that. That's probably the most effective way to deal with climate change locally, which we need to do something. We have to. We can't rely on the fossil fuels the way we have in the past. We need to do some creative things, but it's a good, smart, creative way, and it also gives a lot of Vermonters jobs. So, it's a practical thing. It's a common sense thing. And I think we sometimes get away from common sense and in the legislative process, and we forget that there are people that are going to be affected by higher rates for example, your home fuel. It could put you in a very bad situation.
Yeah, no, I think that's one of the big topics of conversation this year for state legislatures is home heating fuel, clean heat standard, property taxes, and the education funding. That was all. Everybody that we've been talking to, that's the big conversation. And we do have a couple of comments here, and we always like to read our comments because we love people to be part of the conversation. That is part of what we believe in Vermont Daily Chronicle is free speech, right? That's something we talk about a lot. It's something we're very proud to do. Jerry Ziller writes, how about cut people's taxes and let the people who want to give them thereon away, let them. Government is way too powerful. When you say we are losing our freedom of speech, by who? The government, by labeling insurrectionists, racists, MAGA, etc. The politicians make the laws that do nothing for the working class. You could have said it better myself. And that's like one of the.
Nailed it.
They love to use those words, those pejorative names, just to label you as just this, something that you're. What does it even mean, right? To be racist in 2024. What does that mean anymore? I don't know. I think that's one of the ones that gets thrown around so much that it's like hard to know. Same with MAGA. What's so wrong with MAGA? I think that's one of the funniest things about RFK joining is the whole Maha thing. They really played right into it. Why not? So I want to just share too. I met you at the Secretary of State's office when RFK was turning in the however many ballots were required in Vermont. How many was it? Was it 1,000?
Yeah, we had to get a lot more.
1,000 signatures?
Yeah. I think that's correct.
I can't remember.
We got a lot more. We got nearly double that.
I do remember it was quite a lot. But anyway, so turned those in. I met you guys there. At that time, RFK was going pretty strong. I think this was probably early August, maybe a little bit later.
8th.
Yeah, was it August 8th? Yeah, okay. And so it was like they were still going.
Yeah.
And at that point, he hadn't jumped in with Trump yet. So take us back to that time. I was feeling at that point like, hey, man, he's getting on the ballot in all these states. Maybe he's going to really try to go for this. But still in the back of my mind, I always kind of thought, maybe Trump will make him the vice president. And a lot of people, he said I would never do that. And he also said he would never join the Trump administration. So I don't know. What do you guys make of him jumping over to Maha, Make America Healthy Again? What do you guys think?
It shocked me.
Yeah. I think a lot of our yeah.
Gosh, because I still believe in the points that he was making, and that's what attracted me to actually run for office now. Because I wouldn't be doing that now.
Sure.
But stop endless wars.
Yeah.
That sounds like a really good idea. I think that, for example, if you can spend $883 billion right now on Ukraine, and yet you can't feed your children, you got a homeless crisis in the United States, you're not doing anything about the opioid epidemic, really, on a huge scale. So, but you have enough money for the wars. You don't have enough money for FEMA. You can't help the victims down in Helena, from the hurricane.
Asheville, now down in Tampa Bay.
You don't have enough for that, but you have enough to send off to war to bomb somebody and to kill somebody's children. And I think that is just sick. It's abhorrent.
It's criminal. It's sick. It's disturbing.
So I follow him and his points, but I have to do it my own way, and I have to figure out all of those things. I also think that bodily autonomy is really essential. I think that you should have a right to choose whether or not you're going to have a vaccination, and if you want to have it, okay, that's your choice. But don't tell me I have to.
Sure.
Don't mandate that. I don't want to hear your mandates. I don't want to say you can't go to the grocery store. We're going to ostracize you because you're a criminal because you don't. Come on.
No, I know that was crazy.
So I really like what his positions were and are, and I felt like, gee, I don't know how I'm going to assimilate this. And the best way I can explain it for myself is that it's going to take me time. I'm just going to stay on point with the things that made sense from my perspective that he was offering, and I'm going to do my best to continue that in the state of Vermont from my little place.
Sure.
So that was that. I do want to say about MAGA. Make America Great Again. The French historian Alexis de Tocqueville, this is attributed to him. He said he was asked why America was great, and he said in the late 1700s or middle 1800s, America is great because America is good. When America stops being good, America will stop being great. He nailed that. And so how do you get to being good? You do it by taking care of your citizens. And how do you do that? You do it by make America healthy again.
Yep.
So making America healthy again, that's one of the things that I'm running on. I'm running on health, make America healthy again. I'm running on sovereignty. You have the right to have a voice in your government, and you don't have to listen to the top down and the elitists who want to govern you. And you have a right there, and you also have the need to be able to afford to live in the state of Vermont. And when you have a $13.67 minimum wage, and it costs you $23.02 as a single person to live here per hour, then that's not enough. So the incentive isn't even there for you to work if you're only getting that little bit of money. It's just a little over halfway there. So I want people to be healthy. I want our farms to be healthy. I want our soil to be healthy. I want our air to be healthy. I want our water to be healthy. I want our citizens to be healthy. And that means that we have to focus on health. And health can be done in communities like the Meeting House, retooling it for the 21st century, making those wellness centers. And Bobby actually spoke about that. I would say that I was surprised because that's part of the idea that I had in making sure that these meeting houses stay open, that they would be wellness centers. But he's a guy who came out and said, oh, wow, that's where people who are addicted can come. And so I haven't had a conversation with him about it. I've met him, but that really something that resonated with me. I also want to say that when I was in the State House, it was like listening to taking depositions, But we
Which you've
Yeah.
seen a lot.
we
Yeah.
we had an opioid crisis at the time. Nothing came off the board on how to deal with opioid crisis in human services at that time, and it shocked me. Paul Dame and I were on that committee together at the time, and we decided that we wanted to initiate get something off the board on ibogaine, and it just was rejected. We couldn't even have the discussion.
Not happening.
No, but I wanted to see what different things we might take a look at that might help us with this opioid crisis, and Paul did too. And I think Patty McCoy did. I think there were a couple of other people on the committee who did, but the chair didn't like it.
Yeah. Who was the chair at the time?
She's no longer there.
Oh, okay. Well, interesting. Yeah, no, that's one of the big things too that's happened in this country, and talk about a crisis, is the opioid crisis across the nation.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of dives into the pharmaceutical industry too, right? I mean, we haven't really even touched on that yet. And as somebody who's running for U.S. Senator, right, Senator Bernie too, constantly for years has just pounded the drum, big pharma, big pharma, big pharma. And I think to a certain degree he has held them accountable for some of the opioid crisis stuff that's happened in Appalachia, for example, in West Virginia. But that's one of the big issues and how it ties in with the media. Talk to me a little about that, guys.
Well,
Where do you guys stand on it?
First of all, I would have to say that, the Sackler family has come out looking really, really awful about what they've done in terms of making people addicts, right?
Yeah.
And they did that. They didn't just do that in a vacuum. They had a lot of help with a lot of people, even doctors, right? I have a close friend who I was wrote a book with, and he almost died from oxycodone.
Wow.
But now you have a hero, Anthony Fauci, who has also done very, very well with his pushing. Well, you know what, and so my sense is that when you're talking about pharmaceuticals, there are some pharmaceuticals that help us, and aspirin.
Sure.
But let's take a look and say, why hasn't Bernie over all these years ever talked about prevention? Why is it just taking and saying, well, we need to have less, we have to have cheaper drugs?
That's a good question. That's where it is. Answers my question.
So why don't you do things that make people healthy, like nutritional?
Yeah.
Make sure they get the right vitamins. Make sure they get organic food. That's where you play into your local farmers. You make sure that the children in your area get healthy food, not the stuff that comes from who knows where. The truck lands and you get 56 different types of poisons in the food that they're eating. Yeah, so it starts off with prevention and with nutrition and with nutritional education and with doing things like that are going to make people well and healthy so they don't have to rely on pharmaceuticals. There was not anything in the press at all. Dr. Levine never ever mentioned, well, why don't you take vitamin D? Why don't you go out in the sunshine? Why don't you get some fresh air? Why don't you make sure you have zinc? And then they took off of the market. They took off ivermectin. They made sure you couldn't get hydroxychloroquine. So all of the things that already had some efficaciousness, some real ability to help people.
Sure.
They were eliminated. So
I think ivermectin was actually even banned. Talk about censorship. I think that was something that you couldn't even use the word on YouTube for a while.
Yeah, that was
Right.
thanks to Joe Rogan.
Right, exactly, and this harnessing of language is so important to this. Frank Luntz was a Republican strategist 20 years ago, and he really talked about how important language was to kind of manipulating people's ideas. And I guess it goes back to Lehman Brothers in the 30s, trying to make sure Americans keep buying because they understood profit motive as well.
Yeah.
And the power of the corporate media in all of this is undeniable.
Oh, for sure.
Unbelievably strong they are. Again, well-intentioned consumers of media want to believe in our system. Our system has done amazing things. This democracy has created the best innovations in the world.
Yes.
But yet, here we are, and there's 4 or 5 people talking about taking away freedom of speech because it's not quite working. People here on the internet are gaining a little more information or malinformation.
Yeah.
And
they're talking about it.
Yeah, exactly.
I want to give you an illustration here.
So important.
It's true.
I was a senior minister of the First Congregational Church of Los Angeles, California. We had a very big operation.
Wow.
$7 million budget. We had a school of K through 12, 500 students, most ethnically diverse private school in the nation at the time. It was during the 90s. And we had a campus, a 270-acre camp. So I was dealing with people. I was on the board of the Los Angeles Mission, and after the civil unrest, I helped clean it up. I got an award from the United Nations Association, the Ralph Bunche.
Was it the
Peace and
Rodney King riots?
Yeah, it's right after the riots. I helped organize Hands Across Los Angeles. Everybody grabbed halves. We walked, had right across all of Los Angeles, 20 miles of people holding hands.
Wow.
So, anyway. I was invited to a lot of different stuff over the time, and I knew the mayor, Mayor Reardon, and I got an award from the mayor for my service and blah blah. But one thing I went to was at a studio, and I think it was Universal Studios, and the head of the studio was speaking about how inclusive they were, and he was going on and on about how inclusive he was, and then he said, "But I'm going to tell you right now, we will never have Nazis on our show. We'll never depict Nazis." And I sat there and I go, wow, he's inclusive about everybody else but not Nazis. Everybody's got their Nazi.
What do you mean?
Everyone has somebody that they don't like.
And they won't put out there.
So, that's right.
Sure.
That's the issue. We all have to be careful about who is our enemy. Why does Jesus say, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you? Because that's the only way you tip the system in a different direction. You do the thing that is the most difficult thing in the world. Love somebody that you would otherwise despise. Maybe you bring them around. No, I'm not. All of the stuff that Jesus says about is counterintuitive and countercultural, and we're asked to be thinking in ways that are very different than the way we normally think. I want to label such and such a person, but I'm told, you be careful how you label. You be careful how you do that. Remember, they're a human being too. And sometimes we get away from that, and that's to our detriment, all of us. Because how can you live in community if that person is such a demon or so evil, or that person is so wrong? No, everyone has mistakes, everyone makes problems, everyone
Sure.
has to find a way. But, when I listen to the guy say, I'll have no Nazis on my, in our television programming. And I said, well, we all think that way about something or someone, and we have to be careful.
Who do you think it is for you?
I don't know. It's a great question, but I'm not sure. I think that it's the domination system itself. I don't think it's an individual. I think it is the system of domination under which we live that has always been there since time immemorial in different guises, whether it was during, whether it was the Roman Empire or subsequent empires.
Sure.
So I would say it's the system. The system was created good. The system is fallen. The system needs to be redeemed. And that's part of what I believe. And so I would have to say it's not an individual. It's not a group, but it's a system of domination that tries to subject people to a way of thinking that is not beneficial to every citizen, giving them opportunities for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Do you want to talk about briefly the mimetic theory without going too far into it?
Well, I can.
Because that seems really.
Well, I can. I had the opportunity to know René Girard, one of the great thinkers of our era, and he was the person that came up with the idea of the scapegoat theory, and mimesis, and that's we become what we hate. We mirror. So let me use the example of the United States and the Soviet Union. There was a period at which they would mirror each other's behaviors. So this person ramps up war, and then this person ramps up war, and you keep on doing it. That's mimetic. So you're looking in a mirror, and so the person who is your adversary, you become like that person. And he points out that issue, and he comes up with a mimetic theory about how we operate and how we become what we don't want to become. He also came up with the idea of the scapegoat and the scapegoat mechanism, and that is religion is put into place in order to be a safety valve, so that when the community is having real problems and they don't know how to address the problems that they have and the anxiety, and they're all anxious, they have to find somebody to blame for the problems that came in that caused the disease. And this is generally what happened in Greek culture, etc. So you find a person to blame for causing the disease, and then you eliminate them. And that's called the scapegoat mechanism. And it happens in all cultures. And it's a religious way of dealing with a problem so that it doesn't become all-out war. You find somebody to blame, and then you eliminate them, and then there's relief. And peace is restored again until there's more problems again, and then you have to find another scapegoat. So you do that with, like, the Salem witch trial.
Sure.
So you can go, and that's what Jesus is. He becomes
true too.
He's a scapegoat.
Yeah, of course.
So René Girard. I wrote a book with René Girard, and it's called Reading the Bible with René Girard: Conversations with Stephen E. Barry. And I spent 11 hours in interviewing René Girard. For that, I knew René before. I'd seen him at different colloquium on violence and religion, and I'd been around, in Innsbruck or in Riverside, New York, or wherever they had the programs, Montreal. And so I was really blessed by having him be part of my understanding of what the devices are that prompt us to have behaviors that we have, how the scapegoat mechanism works, about mimetic behavior, and a lot of those types of things. I've studied that quite a bit, and actually I did an 11-hour interview, and it's on film, and a portion of that is going to be coming to the state of Vermont in a new documentary film on René Girard. I think I've got 15 or 20 minutes. I'm an associate producer for that film.
Oh, wonderful. Very cool.
Yeah. So that will be coming in November, I believe. And Sam Sorich is the director of that film, and it's called Things Hidden. It's one of the books that René wrote.
Okay.
things hidden, the life and legacy of René Girard. So it's Girard. He is viewed as one of the great intellectuals of our time, theoretical anthropologist who came into Christianity very later, and became is viewed as somewhat of an apologist for the Christian faith, having discovered what he found, that Jesus is the Lamb of God, which is a scapegoat.
Yes, of course.
The Lamb of God takes away the sins of the world, is a scapegoat. And the reason why he's a scapegoat is because Caiaphas, the high priest, says, "Isn't it better that one man should die than the whole culture goes under?" See, he has a very strong culture. He's representing Rome. He's been favored. He's part of the elite and so on. Isn't it better to get rid of this guy who's a rabble rouser than to disrupt the system and the status quo?
Sure.
So that's all unpacked with Girard. Also, Walter Wink does a great job with that, and I think that people like William Stringfellow, there are a lot of people that have subsequently followed Girard and written wonderful books on René Girard and on his theory and on what it means for today. The last book that Girard wrote was pretty bleak, saying that with a breakdown of religion, the potential for all-out hostility has heightened drastically.
What's that based on? Because I have a couple thoughts myself.
He bases this on a German general, and the general's assessment of what's happening in war and how that gets ratcheted up. And he takes and does a deep dive on that particular general and comes up with a pretty apocalyptic view. So
okay. Well, that's also. We've covered some pretty intense bases here today, guys. So you are running for U.S. Senate.
I am.
That's what you said. That's what I.
Yeah, I am.
And someone was like, "Wait a second, he's running for Congress?" No, he's running for U.S. Senate. I was
just being a wise guy.
So, so how have you been campaigning at all? How's it been?
It's been rocky.
It's a challenge.
Well, I would say that I'm really not good at it.
What?
No. First of all, I'm an independent, so I can't get any venues. Thank you very much for letting me be on today.
Why not? I love it.
The reason why, when you're in the lane, Republican,
sure,
Democrat, you have a lot of opportunities to get out there because there are people that are around you that are going to be supporting you. When you get out of the lane and you get in a larger lane for yourself, it's a shrinking lane for you too, because you don't have access to money, publicity,
right,
etc. So it's so it's a two-way street. But I think that you need to have now. We need to have a third party candidates. You have to look at other people that have voices out there and not just look at the system, because the system this is a system of domination that we're living under, just like Jesus lived under his system of domination. We have it here.
But the plus side of that is, of course, that how many Americans now? What's the percentage? It's over 50% who consider themselves independent now, right? And that's why I got involved in your campaign. When you started talking about town meeting, my 6th grade teacher in Londonderry, Vermont, made sure we took the morning off for town meeting so that we could experience the democracy of voices in Peru, Vermont.
Sure.
And I don't know that he was advocating for, a state holiday like you are, but that was really what kind of drew me, was like, we're losing that. We got to get that back, and it's just so damn important.
Yeah.
No, I think that's from everything we've talked about today, the whole concept of building community and having the church being the center of that. I think that's one of the biggest things that we've lost in this country. And we talked about some of the different groups that formed over the last 100 years or so. But no, we're totally missing that. Jerry Zaylor does write a comment that religion is making a quick, I think he meant quick comeback. Scapegoat equals tax free. We need budget on politician spending, a cap on what a politician can spend. Okay. That kind of goes back to the Citizens United, if I'm not mistaken, there. But it's interesting that we've been talking about all this because this whole summer, what I've been making here at my Creemee stand, right? So we were selling Creemees here, and I would host car meets. And over the summer, the car guys that would come, at first started out, people were just coming for fun. But slowly but surely, we realized, wow, we're actually building a community here. Like, we're actually building something.
Yeah.
And then over the next, the ideas started to float over the next few weeks about a car show, and then we did a car show, and then to finalize the season, we did a fundraiser where we raised over $1,000 for veteran suicide awareness.
Wow.
So that was, the race, or the ride, they all met here, and it was like 40, 50 bikes and a couple cars, different guys, and everybody paid to be part of the ride, and they raised over $1,000. And so that was our first one, and it's like, we realized what we're doing, okay, wow, there's so much potential right here what we're doing. And the more I talk with you guys, the conversations that we're having, I hosted events last summer, like we did all sorts of stuff, and there's just so much more to be done. And I think that this country is so hungry for it, it's so hungry for it. It's we're building community, and that's a wonderful thing. And I think what you guys have talked about, it's like, man, and I'm running for justice of the peace too. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah. That's good.
No, that's what it's all about, though. It really is.
Yes. I just want to add that what you're giving that money to is really so important. One of my best buds in the State House sat right next to me, and we jab each other. It's Chip Traiano, Democrat from Stannard, and he's a marvelous guy. He's a vet. And he had it tough. He had it really, really tough. And listening to him and being with him and learning from him just was extraordinarily powerful for me. And that, what you're giving the money to, because he told me about the vets and he told me about his experiences, that's really so powerful that you're doing that for that cause. And so I just say thank you very much.
Well, no, and it wasn't just me. It was actually put on by 802 Hooligans, which is a group that is their motorcycle group, and they're part of what I've been doing this last summer. I mean, I didn't form them, but they put it on, and I helped put it together.
Yes.
And, it's just we're realizing, okay, this is what's needed right now, not just here in Vermont, but all over the country. Communities are feeling gutted. Communities are feeling like there's not a real place to meet and hang out and talk. And, COVID really messed up people, especially young people, socially and economically. I mean, very,
educationally.
very educationally. Yeah, I mean, for just so many different ways. And the big one is, I remember saying when I first told one of my friends earlier in the spring when I said, I want to open, saying, I really want to make a place for people like we used to have down here. We would hang out, like, we were doing stuff all the time. Friends were together. Yeah. This was before COVID.
Yeah.
And then after COVID, it was just like it was gone. So, and I think that's when you start to see a lot of these organizations fall apart. A lot of these philanthropy groups, they're just not doing events like they used to be. And actually, I started to realize that when I ran for state senate in 2022. That's when I went out, did campaigning. I went to these events. I started meeting people in these, little organizations, and they were basically saying exactly that their numbers were waning and it was getting smaller. So it's definitely it's changed a lot. And I think that what you guys are bringing to the table, what you're talking about, Steve, is incredible. And I mean, I know how tough it is to campaign, especially in the state of Vermont. It can be very challenging, but it sounds like you're getting out there and putting out a really important message.
Well, my message is important. It's not just mine. It's
Sure.
RFK Jr. It's very well thought out. It's also I'm doing the best I can to maintain a biblical base in it. And I think that's really important because, our state is viewed as the least religious state in the whole.
Oh, yes.
But we pride ourselves on community. So let's just think about how the spiritual life impacts community. How do you bind a community together? The binding of a community is a covenant between yourself, other people, and God. Because there has to be a higher power in it. Because otherwise what happens is we think that we're so special, we're so great, and we've got so much smarts, and we can do better than, we don't need any higher power. Believe me, I've dealt with a lot of people who have felt that way, and I've dealt with a lot of people who at one point felt that way, and then something happened, and they didn't feel that way anymore. And the life that they then adopted was a better life because they had higher power in their life.
Oh, yes.
And so I'm just advocating for that, not a denomination. You don't have to become a Congregationalist, although I think that it's a good model. But whether you're Jewish, or you're Buddhist, or you like being out in nature, and that's where you find God. That's one of the first places I found it in Vermont. Just walking the hills and hiking and so on. But just connect spiritually and get to that place where you can have a clearer mind about what's going on, and don't worry. There are my friend Richard Wurmbrand, and you should read his book, Tortured for Christ. He's a real hero. And he said there are 365 fear nots in the Bible, one for every day.
Yeah.
So every day, if you're feeling anxious and so on, just remember, fear not. Just take that little statement, fear not. And when you have friends and when you have associates with whom you can discuss topics like this, do it, because it will make you feel better. You'll be able to share with someone. Just like when you've gone through a loss, and you've just gone through a loss, being able to share about your uncle makes a difference.
Sure.
And upholding him and all the good things about him. We need to do that for each other, and not to say, oh, that person, I don't like that person because they believe this, or I'm going to hate that person because they think this way. No, let's not do that. Let's bring America back to the good again. America is great because America is good. When America stops being good, it will stop being great. Let's be good, and we'll be great, and that's a good maha right there.
Yeah, no, I think that when it comes down to it, that's one of that is the biggest issue, is the fact that we are not a healthy country. If we were, we wouldn't be seeing a lot of the issues that we are. We wouldn't see the interpersonal issues with family, with business, with people in the state house. People aren't having conversations like they used to, and there's a number of factors. But I do believe it's the food supply is one of the biggest ones in the country. I think that all the toxins in the food, the toxins in the air, the toxins in pretty much everything. I mean, it's very hard to avoid.
Yeah.
And that affects us all at a core and at a spiritual level ultimately too. And it poisons us physically and spiritually. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges this country's facing, period. I think it, like I said, it affects everything. It affects absolutely everything. Your mental clarity, your ability to do work, how quickly you're able to, your IQ even, how quickly you can think.
Yes.
Which is another part of it that I think I wonder where we've gone with that sometimes. I'm trying to be nice, but it's a crazy thing. I don't know. I don't know where we go with it with Make America Healthy Again, but it does sound like, to me, when I found out Trump was joining the Kennedy team, I was kind of glad. I was excited about it, to be quite honest. I wasn't shocked. I kind of thought that was going to happen from the beginning.
Yeah, I didn't.
I know. A lot of people didn't, but I really did. I thought he would. But then when he did, it made me feel like, whoa, like, okay, man, there actually is hope that they're going to go after some of these issues. Like, that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, that is a big deal.
Like, Trump having somebody on his team. I mean, I take the geoengineering issue pretty seriously, like with chemtrails, and having RFK mention chemtrails on X, like that's a big deal to me, because that means like they're going up against some pretty serious powers at that point, which I was always hesitant to believe that Trump actually would, especially coming out of COVID with the Operation Warp Speed and him taking it on his back like it was his greatest accomplishment, So I don't know. It's just it's kind of, I've always been very concerned about Trump, but with this addition of Maha, I'm like, man, like, are we about to see like this country like go a different direction? I don't know.
If you could get away from that whole divide and conquer
I think
it has been foisted upon us by all powers, and I'm not talking parties at all.
No.
It just seems like the divide and conquer strategy. You mentioned several things there right before talking about health. And it seems like there's just so many ways that we're being encouraged to be divided.
Yes.
And let's find a lightning rod so we can hate this person over here or over here.
Yeah.
And that shuts down conversations, and using language like racist or right wing or whatever, or conspiracy theorist, anything to shut down a conversation. Hey, I'm not going to talk about that. That's the worst thing in the world for democracy. And that's what's going on. And that's what we're seeing from the powers on high. All the time. I mean, we have a former president who was a producer of a Civil War movie. I never watched it. I didn't watch either of those two Civil War movies. But, there seems to be this kind of tacit acknowledgement and almost encouragement of Civil War.
I know.
It seems to be a distraction so that we don't see what's going on up here.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder, we're so busy fighting amongst ourselves that we don't even know who the real enemy is. I think that's the big thing. I sometimes do have questions about that, Civil War. Sometimes I wonder, in some ways, are we already in a Civil War? You have president getting shot at, or former president getting shot at. You see groups of violence. You just see, it's hard to say. I don't think we already are, but I don't know. There's a lot of stuff happening in this country that I have a lot of questions about, and I think a lot of people are on that same page right now. And leading into this election, 2024, what are we doing here, folks? Somebody said to me, somebody very close to me said to me the other day, I cannot wait for this election season to be over. And I looked at her and I said, wait, why? And I always kind of feel that way anyway. But she said, I'm just so tired of everybody like this constant anxiety in the air, like this constant division in the air. I'm tired of seeing signs everywhere, everybody's things, and it's like, I do kind of understand why people get to that point in America, why we're at this point in American politics, because I think people just know that there's a better way, but we're just living continuously every 4 years. It's the most important election ever. Every 4 years, if we don't take this one seriously, this could be consequential for the future of democracy. And it's just like, I just don't understand how every 4 years we end up in this position, and it doesn't really seem to change. And I think we're increasingly disconnected from one another. And it's such a strange situation, because it wasn't always this way.
No. Well, that's because we had a tripodal society. And the tripodal society is like a stool, right? You have 3 legs on the stool, and the legs were the family, number one, the church, and the school. And that's what held the seat up. That's what held society up. Now, when you weaken one of them, that's bad. When you weaken another one, it makes it wobbly. When you weaken the third one, what happens? Your society is no longer firm. So you have a tripodal society, and now what you're doing, basically breakdown of family, no longer having a sense of community with church, and the school. Now what you have for a school is not the small school in your community. You have a larger school somewhere away where the parents are not engaged like they were with the one-room schools in like Rupert, where the 1786 meeting house is, where I'm the pastor. We're trying to keep that alive. But we had all of these little one-room schoolhouses, but everyone was engaged. All of the teachers, few teachers, 2 teachers maybe, with a handful of students, but everybody knew what was going on, and they supported each other. Everything supported each other. Now you have things like, and there's a great case in Benson, Vermont, 1995, where that they wanted to maintain their one-room school, and the Vermont legislature shut them down. So they had to go to off-site and bus them. And when you're busing and you're doing all that stuff, see, Vermont still has an opportunity to still get back to some of the basics, I think.
It's such a scam, though. Like, I'm thinking about how they've been able to manipulate it and make it impossible. They don't want you to be able to just educate your children independently. They want to make sure that they have some grip of control on the content that's being taught. And then also have ties and purse strings to the money, ultimately, to make it happen. Even though, like, I'm thinking from a business perspective right now, why should it be difficult for anyone to just go set up a classroom somewhere and start teaching children? But they make it so there's a bunch of loopholes to get through, or is it, what exactly are they doing this to make it so challenging?
I can't answer that, but what I can say is that when you're taking this, when you have a model where many of the people who are being paid don't even teach, you have level after level of bureaucracy.
Yes.
And that's what's causing all of the price increases in education. So you have a superintendent and then assistant superintendent non-teaching, principal and assistant principal not teaching, and then how many other administrators not teaching, and then you have the teachers, and then you have your students. So what happens is it becomes so exorbitant price-wise that the thing that you're supposed to be there for is lost, which is education. So why are a lot of people actually doing homeschooling? Because they have lost faith in the system. So we need to take a look at the system and see how it can be fixed because it's broken. And I think that that's part of the challenge for the next years. I have to say, just because it may have sounded like I was really negative about everything with the State House, there are some beautiful people in there. I mentioned my buddy Chip Troiano, a Democrat. I'd also mention that Carolyn Brannigan, a Republican, who I sat across the hall from, in the assembly, dear friend who
I know,
they're really, and there are some wonderful, beautiful people there. So it's not about that. It's about you get there and there are agendas that are given by people who aren't even in there. And I think, and here's my big issue, or one of my biggest issues, I think unbeknownst to most of those of us who have served in the legislature, that they're influenced by people that are way, way above us. And their agendas filter in, like the WEF, the World Economic Forum, or the WHO, the World Health Organization. Those organizations are hugely powerful, and they have agendas. And those agendas somehow get into a form that then is presented to people who are trying to do a good job, like our legislators, and they're not even aware the degree to which the outside influencers are impacting what happens on the local level. So what we get is, unbeknownst to us, a trickle-down totalitarianism.
Yeah,
it starts from somewhere else.
No, 100%. And it's one of those things that Jay was actually talking about when he came on the show here. It's like there's 10, 15 people making decisions in the building, if that even. And ultimately, they're not even making the decisions. It's people down in D.C., some group outside of Northern Virginia. That's that it's not people in Montpelier, and that is scary. And it's eye-opening to now hear that from two Democrats. You're not a Democrat now, but formerly served as a Democrat in the legislature.
Yeah.
I've been saying it probably since I was 20. Like, it seems to me that's exactly the case, but I had no way to prove that, and I had no idea how to figure that out. But now I'm starting to see very clearly that this is the case. And these things like the clean heat standard, what is that really? Well, it's not it's not something that Vermonters are asking for or came up with. And maybe they've implanted the idea into everybody. This is something that you guys want over the past 20 years.
Yeah.
But it's not our idea. You know, it's a very interesting situation that we find ourselves in with that. I'm sorry?
There's legislative software that tracks across the nation some of these bills in issue areas. And you can, I don't have the ability to, but there's certainly a way to do it. My former lobbyist, when I was in Montpelier, had such a software where you could track bills and see the various states where different legislation is being promoted. And so it could be observed that Vermont is, as a supermajority Democratic legislature, is very attractive to certain outside interest areas, right?
Yes.
That's what you're getting at.
No, for sure. And I think the big thing, too, is, you know, when you look at the size of the state, too, you know, to win a state over for not just, you know, a specific energy policy, right? I mean, the real big thing is those 2 Senate seats. You don't have to spend $500 million, $500 million. I think that's probably extreme too, but $50 million to win a Senate seat in the state of Vermont. Or excuse me, you don't have to. You don't have to. In other states, you have to spend a lot of money to win congressional seats, right? I mean, here it's very, very little comparatively. So, you know, kind of, you know, here you are running for U.S. Senate. It's like, if you look at other states where the amount of money you have to spend for those 2 massive votes right there in the United States Senate, which you're talking about on a world stage having power that is just massive. I mean, you guys, you know. So it's like, for them to pass the bills like the Clean Heat Standard and have a complete supermajority and just like this total domination of this little state.
Domination system.
It's not that hard for them to do it. Right. It's really cheap, actually. And that's why we're kind of the target of it. And I like to say, too, you know, if it were flipped around the other side on the Republican Party, probably be the same way, just a little different. Yeah. And that's why I don't hope for that either.
Right.
I hope for balance.
Balance.
Yeah.
Is the key word.
Yeah. I think that everything that you've said is accurate, and I think that there are people like myself who didn't understand that there were things coming from outside. I thought that there was a lot more autonomy in the State House than there really is. I thought that the blueprint that was received from ALEC for the Republicans was pretty clear. I wasn't aware that there might have been that also going on with the Democrats because it was much more subtle. So I think that the best antidote to that is to make sure that you have strong local select boards, and that you attend the select board meetings. You support your select board through the years. When something is coming up, that you actually go there and that you make your voice be heard. For example, a young lady from our local high school, Burr and Burton, at a recent debate, got up and asked about guns, and people responded. But we need to be asking about telephones, cell phones. They're as dangerous, and probably far more dangerous, certainly, than guns on a level. I'm not talking about the lethality of a gun compared to a cell phone, but I am talking about the influence. We talked about how we are influenced by the media. We talked on that briefly prior to sitting down here. And I think that these children, these youth, should not have phones with them all the time in their high schools and in their schools. That needs to be deposited. If they want to have that after school, fine. But there needs to be legislation, and I think that there is a...
They actually did just start doing this in Harwood, over a valley here in Waitsfield.
Thetford Academy.
Thetford. There's a handful of states they're starting to do it, and I think it's great.
I think it's absolutely fantastic. There's a gal, she's a legislator up in Williston, who's putting in legislation, and I support that 100%. I think that that's great legislation. And if it comes from a Democrat or Republican, if it's great legislation and saves our children and so on, I'm all for it.
It shouldn't matter.
It doesn't matter where it comes from, as long as it's good and equitable in terms of everybody taking a look at what is the best for the total, not for a few.
Yeah, and I think it's just become, the more that I sit here and think about the instances where that happens, it's a beautiful thing when it does, and it makes you wonder why it can't more. And I sit here thinking, why can't it more? It must feel so good when they pass something that everybody agrees on, and it is a good thing, and it helps people.
And celebrate.
Yeah, it must feel great, celebrate, but then I look at, why they can't agree on some of the other stuff, like the clean heat standard, for example, and what it comes down to a lot of the time is some type of emotional draw or position that's held, and that they can't really, I don't know, it's too scary or existential, it triggers that fight or flight, death or being alive, I guess. Do you know what I'm getting at? It's like when I look at the big issues like abortion or climate change on the left, it always seems to be that they're very unlikely to agree, at least give an inch on a lot of that stuff. And I guess some people, you could say that about the right too. It goes both ways. But my when I'm looking at them specifically, it's why is it so hard for them to give in those moments? And what do you think that is?
I think a lot of it has to do with pride and ego. I also I don't know fully, but I think that there's a lot of pressure for people to take these issues and to make sure that you are in your lane on them.
On the right side.
On the right side of the issue from your particular party.
Sure.
You have to stay with them. And if you challenge and say, I've got a different perspective, I really don't think that then you're not playing by the rules. You're moving outside of what you should be doing. I think there's pressure on people.
That's what Jay said too. Jay said the same exact thing. There's a lot of pressure once you're in that building to not be or think a certain thing, because if you do, then that's bad. And it's ooh, whoa. Well, he even said people were upset that he would come on this podcast and have a conversation with me because Paul's he's pretty far to the right, or whatever that means, whatever they want to say. But
which is all craziness anyway.
I know it's and that's what I think people are Jay gives me hope that people are really starting. You guys obviously do too, but I mean I'm really more in the same boat as you guys. Over the last 8 years, I was asleep. I was also a teenager. I didn't really know, but it's when you just kind of things have changed so much, and then it seems like there's a train of freedom and free speech and consciousness expanding for so many people.
Critical
thinking, project censored, things like that. That it seems to me that it's going a certain trajectory. We're just right now in the state of Vermont, specifically in this moment where it's as worse as it possibly could get. And Rob Roper said to me earlier, I said that it couldn't be worse, and he's like, oh no, it could be much worse. It could, and he is right. I do know he's right, but I think it's hard to imagine that it gets worse, right? And we're going to win some. Well, they're going to win some. There's going to be some change in the State House this year. I don't know how much, but there will be some. I think that's inevitable. You look at the school budgets getting voted down, for example. That was something we saw that happen, and I don't think a lot of people saw that happening. Now it's hard to say that anything's not on the table, So we'll see what happens with it. I mean, I don't know. I know you're running for U.S. Senate, but how closely are you following what's happening in the State House for any elections? Are there any elections you guys are watching closely around the state that you think are hopeful for Republicans, independent, or even somebody, a Democrat, that maybe would be?
I can't respond to that.
Can't speak to it.
What about your second race? I mean, the fact that you are in the Bennington County State Senate.
You're running for state senate in Bennington? Are you really?
Yeah, sure.
What?
I'm doing two
which
things.
You can do
I know.
simultaneously, which I hadn't realized,
all right,
which makes it harder.
Let me just speak to that for a second. Not that you asked, but
Sure.
So if you look at art, there's a pointillist, and the pointillist painter who makes this great artwork. If you go up close to it, in a square inch, he's got, I don't know, hundreds of dots, and it doesn't compute to anything. You don't see it. So just a bunch of dots when you're up really close, and then you walk back, and then you see something. You can see a lot of colors, and then you move back further, and it begins to take on patterns, and then your mind begins to say, oh, I understand this better. Then you move back, and then you see figures, and then you can say, oh, wow. And then you move back further, and you get this whole big, huge understanding of a world on that canvas. So I'm taking a look at the big picture to try to understand it, so then I can go into the small, and I understand what the smaller is because I have the bigger picture. So in order for me to understand how to do better on the local level, the grassroots level, which is really essential, I need to know what's going on the bigger level. So, for example, if the Trans-Pacific Partnership is doing something that's going to affect your sovereignty because they're going to be judges offshore that make decisions that are going to affect you in your country, then you better know about that. And that's why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because I think that a representative, senator, whatever, need to have a big picture, and they have to have a small. And they have to understand the interplay and how they can best affect the small by also understanding the larger. And I think that some people can do that really well. I'm not sure that I can, but I'm trying because I think it's essential. I think, for example, all the stuff that we are doing with our foreign policy all over the world is horrible. There should be aid going to the Palestinians and to the Israelis, not bombs. That's just a little example. But we should be making sure that the agricultural products are not dead seeds you can only plant once and then it wipes out the next crop. You don't do that to other people. You need to have a sensitivity. You want to treat people in the right way. So I think you need to have the large picture and what we're not doing so well, and then you have to look at the small picture and what we can do better and actually effectively make change.
Sure. No, well, hey, we've covered a lot of bases here today, guys. I think we've talked about a lot of really interesting subjects. We've been going now for about an hour and 30 minutes. And I just got to say, this has been such a fun conversation we've had. I'm glad that we were able to make it happen.
Thanks.
Just to do it. Have you done a handful of interviews throughout the state, or is this one of the first ones that people have actually wanted?
No, this is the first one.
See, that's. I'm so glad to hear that. I mean, I'm not glad to hear that, but I'm glad that we were able to make it happen.
No, really.
Because
so much,
some people say, why interview independent, blah blah blah, and it's like, look, man, at the end of the day, it's like, this is what it's all about. This is why I do what I do. This is why Guy does what he does, is because we're just trying to reach those voices that aren't otherwise being heard. And I think that, I take great pride in that. And so does Guy. So I'm really glad that we did this today, guys.
I am too, and I have to just put a shout out to somebody like a Mark Higley.
Oh yeah, that guy's the best.
In Lowell, and he was in the legislature when I was there, and he's still in there. He's got some great bills, and I think that he's a great guy.
Me too.
And Allison Despathi.
Oh yeah.
Boy, I love listening to her. She's so smart, and she is so articulate and so helpful. And then you got Vicky Masters, who worked with me on as a captain with the RFK Jr. campaign. She's just wonderful. There's a lot of people out there that are just amazing, who are doing so much work, really great work. And my buddy here, I have a chance actually to have ideas that I can bounce somebody off of, that he'll give me a response, and it's wonderful. to have dialogue. And that's what we need to be doing for each other, have the dialogue. Republicans, Democrats, independents, nothings, who cares?
That's what it's all about.
And the libertarians, I went to a great thing, Pork Fest.
Yeah, Pork Fest, yeah.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I just, and I know Chris Martenson. I think he's fabulous. Jeffrey Tucker is really smart, and Naomi Wolf, listening to her was great, and meeting all those folks. So libertarians out there, they're wonderful. I mean, we have to learn how to listen better so that we come up with the best decisions on how to have a governance in Vermont that's going to be effective for everybody.
I agree.
And
it's very well put.
I just want to shout out to you for this, because what you're doing is you're mining people's curiosity, and you're developing their critical thinking, because you're allowing a diversity of voices, and that is so hugely important, and that is what is lacking in all of our corporate media today.
Yes.
And I really appreciate you taking some chances and bringing people onto your show and saying, let's just have a conversation. That's what we used to do.
Yeah,
let's keep doing that. Thank you.
Absolutely, and it's a lot of fun to do it. You know, I'm proud of what we do. Vermont Daily Chronicle is 100% sustained by people that are sustaining subscribers for $9 a month. That's 30 cents a day. You can support free speech in Vermont, and that's something that, like I say, we take great pride in. And man, I'm so proud to do it, because I can literally sit here and say there's nobody that's paying us to have a certain degree of a certain way of thinking, a certain agenda or special interest secretly behind us pushing a certain way. It's like we have what we believe. We get to say those things. And if I were told that, when I was coming out of college, that would happen, and that's how I'd make my living, man, that would be pretty amazing. That's what we've been able to do. So, guys, I don't know if there's anything else you guys want to add before we wrap this up.
If people want to know a little bit more about me, they can go on votesberry.com. That's VOTESBERY, votesberry, Steve Berry. So votesberry.com, and then they can get some info, and they can see my website. And say, hey, by the way, this is really cool. I just got a notification from the Library of Congress that said this website they want to archive and use in the future in the Library of Congress. So it's a cool website, apparently. The Library of Congress said it was cool. So
I'll be sure to look into it.
He's been working on it. VoteSberry.com, and I have Bertie out there in Los Angeles, California area working on it, and Mitch Morrison working on it, and GetVotes.com app. And so those guys, hats off to them, because I wasn't expecting to hear that we were getting archived by the Library of Congress.
I guess I'll have to be sure to check it out, and you should too, everybody. I definitely will. That sounds cool.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for everybody tuning in. This has been another episode of Creemee Cast, live here in Bean Studios in Northfield, Vermont. This is an episode of VDC TV.